I normally film these on different days, so I have a different outfit. Today I didn't. I'm doing the two videos, so I got a hat. Number 15! This is David Lynch's directorial debut called Eraserhead. It's pretty infamous. Again, this is one of those ones where I don't know if I need to talk about it much, uh, but I will. Just because I guess there's not as many people that I have seen this as maybe I thought, because we recently watched it during movie club. And what it basically is about a man who his girlfriend gets pregnant and then has a child. Or is it a child? Is it an alien? Is it not? And it's a experimental avant-garde film. It doesn't make sense. There's a lot of weird things going on, but there's a through line in the film, and you get it. It's girlfriend gets pregnant, she gets frustrated, she leaves, and he has to deal with the child himself. And there's just a lot of imagery and stuff. But what this film does great is the audio is phenomenal. If you can watch this film with headphones on, volume up, and just listen to the layers of sound, it induces anxiety. It becomes white noise. It becomes sometimes comforting, sometimes disturbing. This film is it. There's only one other David Lynch film on this list, and he has a very specific style, and he's kind of the epitome of, like, he and maybe the last person on this video are kind of the epitome of what people think of when they think of, like, avant-garde experimental, like, just random shit on the screen, and oh, people will find meaning in anything. You know what I mean? And I get that. I think what this film does well is, because there's a very basic, simple, and empathetic storyline kind of hidden in there. Not even hidden. It's pretty upfront. About the main character and his, like, frustrations and stuff with being a new father. But throughout it, there's just imagery and scenes and sounds that just evoke. And as I've mentioned before, I feel like good art, just art in general's purpose is to evoke. And this evokes a lot of feelings. People that I've shown this to that maybe didn't even like it, they still felt something watching it. And it leaves an impression, which is very, very, like, I mean, I don't know what else you can say about film if it leaves an impression on you and makes you think and keeps you thinking about it, wondering about the symbology and the metaphor and just the all of that, right? And there's so much history and, behind the making of this film, and David Lynch himself, possible inspirations for it himself, being a new father to a child that was club-footed and living in, like, basically just slums of Philadelphia. And there's a lot of stuff that, if you read about what kind of place David Lynch was in when he made this film, you can really contextualize a lot of it. But even, I think David Lynch has said that might be reading a bit too far into it. It still feels like a personal film. And it's still, like, it's just amazing how much he was able to do with limited resources, because he kept losing funding and stuff like that. But it's a great film. It is highly influential. This is one of those ones that there's the history and story behind the film itself, not the film itself, is very, very, it's very deep and runs through a lot of art, not just film. And for that, it's important. But I think just, I can sit down and watch this. It's very similar to Tetsuo Iron Man, and I only put this higher than Tetsuo Iron Man because I think that this does a better job of evoking emotion and tells a more nuanced and deeper story than Tetsuo. Tetsuo is just pure sensory. This has that, but it feels like this connects on a deeper level. Alright, here's the film where I talk about something that's disturbing and meta. It's one of the ultimate pretzel Kelly movies. It's 14.
What is it, honey?
There's someone here.
This is the second and final Michael Hanake film on my list. It's called Funny Games US. Technically called Funny Games US. So what this is I'll tell the story first. Basically, Naomi Watts and Tim Roth and their son go to a summer home to vacation to play golf with their neighbors, and they meet two young men dressed in white preppy clothing who take them hostage and torture them. That's the story. Michael Hanake made this film almost 10 years after he made the first one called Just Funny Games, which was in German. And it's basically a shot-for-shot remaster or remake, just with English dialogue. Which is very interesting considering apparently Michael Hanake does not speak English very well. But it's more or less just shot for shot. But I chose the US one because the two main not the two main characters, the two boys that do the home invasion are way better in the US version than they are in the German one. The German one, they're a little stilted. And in this one, they feel like they have more personality. And they have like a younger voice, which I think it helps accentuate the film a little more. So that's the story. That's the slight history behind it and why I prefer the US one. So why do I like this film? This film is great because I'm going to go ahead and just right now do, right after this, I'm going to do spoilers as far as why I like this movie. And I think that it's important to watch this movie without spoilers. So before I get to spoilers, I'll just kind of give you, I guess the best way I can, a description of this film, or try to contextualize when this film came out, what you might have thought going into this film. You might have thought that this is a film about a young couple and their son that get tortured in horror movie fashion by these two villainous young men, and this was amidst the period of torture porn films like Hostel and stuff like that, right? So, if that sounds like a film you might be interested in seeing, stop here, skip to the time code I'm about to post, and we'll get to the next film. Otherwise, stay tuned, and I'll tell you about why I love this film. Okay, so you had time to either watch it or you chose not to and you just want to hear me talk about it. So, what I love about this film is it subverts pretty much not only that period of time when it comes to the like torture porn horror movie kind of style, but it subverts it basically asks a lot of questions about the relationship between a filmmaker and their story, the characters in the story, and the audience. Because a lot of times watching films and stuff is seen as passive. And I don't believe that it's a passive experience. I think that it's maybe para-active or quasi-active. I don't know the best way to describe it. But what this film does is it highlights that you are not as passive a audience member as you think. Because through scenes where characters, the two main villains, the boys, break the fourth wall and stuff. They basically pull you out of your passive state and get you to almost be mindful, right? Scenes where like you are hoping the characters will succeed, they might pull you out of it, you know, and ask you, right, you want them to succeed, right? Or we don't want this to end yet, right? We want this to keep going on. You want to see more. Things like that, right? But then it does other things that are more interesting too. Like, one of the highlights of torture porn is seeing the torture and seeing gore and seeing violence. This film doesn't let you see it. And it is even more disturbing sometimes not seeing it. It asks you to like, you search through this for like, there's a brilliant scene where one of the boys, like early into the invasion, like tells this horrible story that is both contradictory and just insane, about like the other one being like basically a crack baby and abused and stuff like that. And part of you kind of wants to believe that that's true, because you're like, well, they have to be evil because they came from this rough place, or there has to be motivation or reasoning or explanation. And he just flat out just says, no, that's not true. Why would you believe that? And they never, and like the closest they get to explaining why they're doing it is basically by saying either because we can or why not, you know? This film was, so the first film, it's weird. The German one was received well when it came out. The American one was not. And I think that that's mostly because of audience. The people that are more likely to see the German film, basically, the people that are more likely to see a foreign film are probably more likely to read into it a little differently than the English language put out in theater version, right? And a lot of people accuse this of being the very thing that it is against. A lot of people claimed it was like torture porn and just like heartless and all this other shit, right? But that's the point. That's the point. I watched an interview with Michael Hanake where he basically said there were many points in this film where he went out of his way to realize, okay, this is where the audience will get that dopamine hit, where that hope will happen. And my job right now is to snuff that out. And this film does a great job of doing that. This film, more than any other film that I can think of, really breaks down that wall. And it's not because of fourth wall breaks. The fourth wall breaks are a tool to get to what I'm talking about. Those fourth wall breaks help you in the moment realize what you're feeling, who you're rooting for, why are you rooting for them. In a moment where like Naomi Watts is forced to strip nude, you don't see her actually nude. What you see is her face. You see her emotional reaction to the scenario. When the child gets killed, it happens off screen. And then there's this long 20 minutes period where the boys leave for some reason, and all you're left with is Naomi Watts, Tim Roth, mourning in one long take that's about 10 minutes long, mourning the death of their son and then trying to escape. It is the most boring and hard to watch part of this film. But that's the purpose, because you as an audience member don't want to see this. What you want to get back to is the torture and the interaction between these characters and the villains. You start to realize, I need these villains in this film. I could go on about this film. I think it's brilliant. And like I said, I slightly prefer the American one over the German one. They're both great. Whichever version you can see it, they're fine. The American one's really hard to find, though. I had to order a UK copy of it to get it on Blu-ray, which is just bullshit. But anyways, Michael Hanake, thank you.
Have a seat, please. I'm Paul. We're gonna make a bet now. You bet that you'll be alive tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and we bet that you'll be dead. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch the tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
don't you just kill us?
You shouldn't forget the importance of entertainment. You shouldn't have done that, Anne.
Keep me safe all through the night.
That's awesome, really. Really.
This is where I might get a little nostalgic, but I still think it's a great movie. Number 13.
I own an island off the coast of Costa Rica. I've spent the last 5 years setting up a kind of biological preserve.
If you don't know, I've mentioned this before. This is the first movie I have memory of seeing in theater when I was very, very young. And that's probably coloring it a bit, but I think that this is probably one of the best ever blockbusters ever. Just, it captures just imagination. It's like dinosaurs were always bones in a museum, or illustrations in a book, and then to see a film like this where they were like coming to life and stuff, it blew my mind, right? And you know what, even to this day it still blows my mind. The combination of practical effects and 3D effects still look really good. The practical effects look way better, but and some of the 3D like animated effects don't look that great, specifically like the raptor jumping up at the vent. But I do remember seeing this as a double feature with Jaws in theater about like 10-15 years ago with friends, and there was a decent amount of people there to watch it, and I still remember that specific scene. There were teenagers watching the film with us, and the girls were screaming and freaking out when that raptor almost bit that girl in the ankle. So these were kids that probably weren't even born when Jurassic Park came out, and it's still effective, So I think the thing about this, other than like the scope and the imagination, is the pacing is just perfect. I can't think of any part of this film that really like drags or is out of place, really. There's some scenes that like there's a lot of like typical summer blockbuster, specifically blockbuster Spielberg like moments. Moments of like deep wonder and reflection kind of moments, right? When they're in the tree looking at the brachiosaurs. There's comedy in that same scene when one of them sneezes on the girl. There's comedy, with the boy getting electrocuted kind of thing. But that's all. But the thing that he did really well in this film is that everything is kind of like you went from the comedy doesn't feel out of place because you just got done with some other contrasting emotion. So with the fence climbing, it was tension and almost Hitchcockian, like kind of ticking time bomb kind of thing, right? With the sneeze thing, it was like that sense of wonder and whatnot, right? There's a whole bunch, like, people, if you want to nitpick, you can nitpick it as far as like what could happen, the science and stuff like that. I don't care. The Sam Neill's great, Laura Dern's great, Jeff Goldblum obviously is great. I also don't care how well it keeps with the book. I don't care about that. The kids go from being annoying to rooting for them, which is very commendable. Because a lot of pretty much the last part of this movie is of the kids and them in the main building of Jurassic Park. And so to go from early in the film where you, like Sam Neill's character, just are annoyed with these kids, to at the end rooting for them and them being, you know, basically the linchpin of that like final act is really interesting, really commendable. I still, even just editing this video, listening to the music, get chills. So this is one that is probably influenced heavily by my connection to the film personally. I don't know if anyone really disagrees that it's a great film. I think it's a great film. For me, this is the like epitome of a blockbuster movie. I still to this day, I've probably watched this movie more than any other movie now that I think about it, between when I first saw it as a kid up until this point. And even just like I said, editing this and watching the trailer makes me want to go back and watch it. So that's high praise for a film, I think.
But John, if the Pirates of the Caribbean breaks down, the pirates don't eat the tourists.
Must go faster.
Let's get snooty with number 12. This is the only Terrence Malick film on my list, and I'll be completely honest because I haven't seen too much Terrence Malick. But I have seen this, and if you know me, I am agnostic / atheist. But this film is the closest thing I have had watching a film to a spiritual experience. And that might sound like hyperbole, but this film is just... One of the films that I mentioned that's didn't make this list, this whole list, is 2001: Space Odyssey. And I know like some people have complaints about it, or like they have complaints about like, you know, the just like jumping in time and like, oh, it's just good imagery set to beautiful music. If you don't like 2001 for that, you will hate this film. You will hate this film because this entire film is nothing but that. It's almost 3 hours long, but it is just... It feels like... So, the film, like, there's a basic story in here about a family, a small family and stuff that suffers a tragedy and whatnot, right? And kind of like how the family dynamic works. But that's intertwined with images and video and stuff of, like, cosmic scale events, microscopic events, dinosaurs, nature... all of that stuff. And it sounds like the prototypical snooty, snobby film. And in a lot of ways it is. But, as I mentioned, I think art evokes, and this evoked something in me very strongly. It is, in a lot of ways, that like Kubrick tried to encapsulate a lot of like the scope of humanity within 2001. It was kind of hindered, in my opinion, by the fact that we have this very isolated story, and that felt more interesting than a lot of the other stuff. It felt disconnected in a lot of ways, almost kind of like coincidentally or incidentally connected to the larger scope, right? This film doesn't make any pretense about it. This whole film is basically the history and narrative of humanity and beyond humanity, just life on Earth. And that sounds like big and impossible, and you might watch it and still feel that way, not gonna lie. Terrence Malick is a beautiful director. He has probably the best eye in film as far as like composition of shots and just like putting it to music and stuff like that. Like I said, this is the closest I've come ever to having what feels like a spiritual experience watching a film. Just like just understanding scale and scope and expanse. It's like a lot of like it's like almost like watching like the Planet Earth documentaries, but in a film narrative story kind of. Basically, if you took a lot of the scenes and stuff from like a Planet Earth video and made like a film version of a poem about humanity and life, that's what this film is. That probably doesn't sound interesting to a lot of people. And I freely admit that. This is one I don't know if I can recommend. I haven't even talked about whether I recommended any of these films recently in the past, like, 2 videos. This is one, though, I will probably say I cannot recommend. Unless what I've described sounds very interesting and engaging to you. This is one of those one. Another great example is like the ending of Annihilation, where it's just music and imagery. Like that, right? Some people got really annoyed by that, right? Imagine an entire film stretched out where it's music and imagery and it's just visual and spoken poetry about life. It's like I said, it's snooty. It might be esoteric. I don't think it's esoteric. It doesn't feel like it. I definitely don't think it's sophomoric or anything like that. I think Terrence Malick is a brilliant person, and this is his vision, and he put it out there, and he really believes in it. But I don't know. I don't even know how to. I can't. I don't even know. All right, let's go from slightly esoteric, visual, artistic, snooty film to black and white, foreign, snooty film with number 11. This is Hiroshi Teshigahara's Woman in the Dunes. If you haven't heard of this film, again, I don't blame you. This is... So, Teshigahara is actually very interesting because he is the first person of Asian descent ever to be nominated for Best Director at the Academy Awards, and it was for this film. And you might be able to see it in the trailer that begins and ends this video. God, he's got a great eye for cinematography. Just the sand and stuff that is in this environment almost feels like another character, and it feels stage play in a lot of ways. It kind of has like it has like a surreal, like an absurdist. It's definitely an absurdist film. It feels like a lot of people compare this film to Camus' Myth of Sisyphus. And I can see that. I've read and heard some arguments against it, but even that, those arguments feel very kind of technical by definition. So What's this story about? This story is about a school teacher who, as a hobby, collects insects, and his dream is about finding a new variety of insect in this desert beach area in Japan, right? He misses the bus one day, and the locals in this little desert village put him up with a woman who lives kind of in this pit in the sands. And she's very nice and hospitable. And when he wakes up in the morning, they've taken the ladder and basically have trapped him down there with this woman. And this woman perpetually is forced to keep her house from getting buried by the sand dunes around her that are trying to swallow up the house, and that had already swallowed up another house she lived in and killed her husband and son. So it's an absurdist story. The relationship between these two develops, it ebbs and flows. It's sensual in a lot of places. There's so much, like, it's a parable, basically. This film is a parable. It's about, like, finding meaning, detachment from, like, kind of the civilized world in a lot of ways. It's about finding purpose, even when there is no purpose in a lot of ways. More than anything, what impresses me, other than the story, is, and just the fact that it's just a parable set to film, is that it is so beautifully shot. The music in this trailer is not in the movie, but the music that is in the movie is just eerie and, like, solemn. It's strange. Throughout the film, they are just, like, coated in sand, and it's visually, because they visualize and focus on these people being covered in sand and constantly, like, thirsty and stuff like that. It creates those sensory feelings. Like, it's like, anyone that's been to a beach and stuff, or had played in sand or whatever, knows the feeling of just being unable to get it off of you and stuff. And I'm not gonna make the Anakin joke here, but it is that feeling, and that it's that kind of like how, like, if you get sand and you can't get rid of it, it's that feeling of it's almost like a minor anxiety, right? Like, I just can't get rid of it. I'm constantly reminded it's there because it's sticking to me, and it's annoying, and it's, like, you know, abrasive and all this stuff, right? It feels like that. It's like, I don't know, you still feel those things. This is definitely a meditative film. Like, not like Tree of Life. Tree of Life is basically like a meditation / poem, right? This is not it. There is a story, there's dialogue, there's interaction. This feels like an absurdist play in a lot of ways. And it's just really interesting. And the ending is kind of maybe a little predictable, maybe a little on the nose and unsatisfying. But I think it works. I still think it works. I saw this film for the first time a couple months ago, and it's one of the best films I've ever seen. I was not bored once during it, and there's just long stretches of visualizations of, like, the sand movement and stuff like that, which again creates this idea that the dunes and the sand are another character in this film that they're contesting against, right? And it's not, like, the fact that she's kind of been forced to and has kind of accepted her almost marriage to the environment around her, and now this new person has come in and he's trying to adapt to it and find his own purpose and meaning. If that sounds interesting, I do recommend this one, but this is, again, one of those ones that's just not for everyone, and I completely understand why. It can probably feel slow, it can probably feel meandering, it can probably feel like nothing's happening, but I enjoyed it, and I love this movie so much. Again, beautifully shot, just beautifully.
気を呼びますから。